The massive space station floated in the darkness between stars like a jewel made of metal and light. Prime was its name, and it was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Ships from 100 different worlds docked at its ports every hour, and beings of every shape and size walked through its corridors. Wells stood at one of the observation windows and watched another ship arrive. She was a human woman of 42 years with dark hair tied back in a simple knot and tired eyes that had seen too many diplomatic meetings in the past week. As the official ambassador from Earth, she was supposed to look confident and strong, but right now she just felt small. Earth had only discovered faster than light travel 40 years ago. In galactic terms, humanity was like a newborn baby taking its first steps, while everyone else had been running marathons for thousands of years. Most of the alien species here had empires spanning hundreds of worlds. Humanity had barely managed to colonize Mars and a few moons in their own solar system. Her assistant Danny Park walked up beside her. He was a young man fresh out of the diplomatic academy with eager eyes and a tablet always in his hands. He reminded of herself 20 years ago before the job had worn her down. "The council session starts in 1 hour," Danny said. "They're bringing out the monolith today." Nodded slowly. The monolith was the reason everyone had gathered here. It was an artifact discovered 3,000 years ago on a dead world at the edge of the galaxy. The species who found it had long since gone extinct, but the monolith remained. It was made of a black stone that seemed to swallow light, and on its surface was carved a riddle in mathematical symbols that any intelligent species could understand. The riddle had never been solved, not once in 3,000 years. Every major civilization had tried. They had sent their greatest philosophers. They had connected 17 billion individual minds into one massive thinking machine and still failed. The preservers, who were considered the species ever to exist, had spent 3 centuries studying the riddle before they vanished from the galaxy entirely. And now the council had gathered again, because new translation technology had refined their understanding of the riddle itself. Perhaps this time someone would succeed. And Danny made their way to the grand amphitheater at the center of the station. It was a vast circular room that could hold 10,000 beings, and today it was packed completely full. Saw creatures of every description. There were those with their face tentacles swaying gently as they communicated through chemical signals. There were those whose bodies were made of living crystal that chimed softly when they moved. There were beings of pure energy contained in magnetic bottles, and there were hive creatures that moved as one organism despite having hundreds of separate bodies. Humanity's section was small, just Danny and a handful of scientists who had been allowed to observe. They sat in the upper rows where the view was worst and the seats were smallest. Nobody expected the young species to contribute anything meaningful. A hush fell over the crowd as Chancellor took the central platform. He was impressive even by alien standards. His body was covered in scales that shifted color with his emotions, and he had 4 arms that moved with fluid grace. He had led the Galactic Council for over 200 years and was known for being fair but utterly humorless. "We gather once more to face the challenge of," announced. His voice was deep and resonant, and the translation devices carried his words to every ear in every language. "For 3,000 cycles, this riddle has mocked our greatest minds. Today, we bring the monolith itself to Prime in hopes that direct contact might yield new insights." The floor at the center of the amphitheater began to open. A platform rose slowly from beneath, and on it sat the monolith. Felt her breath catch in her throat at the sight of it. It was about 3 meters tall and shaped like a rectangular pillar. Its surface was perfectly smooth and so black that it seemed less like an object and more like a hole cut into reality itself. Looking at it made her eyes hurt in a strange way, as if her brain was struggling to process what it was seeing. "The riddle has been translated into standard galactic notation," continued. "Let it be displayed for all to see." Holographic text appeared in the air above the monolith. Read the words slowly and felt a chill run down her spine. I am greater than the infinite, I am more than all. The dead possess me eternally. The living who have me shall die. What am I? The amphitheater was completely silent. Read the riddle again and again. It seemed simple, almost childishly so, but the more she thought about it, the more impossible it became. How could anything be greater than infinity? Infinity, by definition, was the largest possible concept. And how could anything be more than everything? The dead possess it eternally, but the living who have it will die. It was a contradiction wrapped in a paradox. I don't understand, Danny whispered. It sounds like a trick question. Maybe that's the point, replied quietly. Maybe the trick is that everyone keeps looking for a complicated answer. The first challenger approached the monolith. It was a being from Mentes, a species that had evolved beyond physical bodies and existed as pure thought. The floated before the artifact as a shimmering cloud of light and began to speak in frequencies that the translators struggled to render. The answer is mathematical infinity of the Omega class, the declared. A set that contains all other infinities and therefore transcends them. Everyone watched the monolith. For a moment nothing happened. Then a single pulse of red light flickered across its surface and faded. The had failed. More challengers came forward as the hours passed. The philosophers of the dreaming mist proposed consciousness itself as the answer. The hive creatures of the collective suggested perfect unity. A being made of living metal theorized about dimensions beyond normal spacetime. Each time the monolith pulsed red, each time the answer was rejected. Watched with growing fascination. She was not a philosopher or a scientist, but something about this riddle called to her. It was too simple to be as hard as everyone was making it. The answer had to be obvious. It had to be something that a child could understand. But what? The session ended without a solution. As the crowds dispersed, remained in her seat staring at the monolith. Danny waited patiently beside her. "We should go," he said finally. "Your sister arrives tomorrow, remember. You promised to meet her at the docking bay." Blinked. In all the excitement, she had completely forgotten. Her sister Molly was coming to visit, and she was bringing her daughter Lucy. An 8-year-old girl was about to arrive at the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Had no idea how significant that visit would become. The days that followed were filled with failure. Attended every session and watched as the greatest minds in the galaxy took their turns before the monolith. Each one arrived with confidence and left with confusion. The riddle seemed to mock them all. They were among the most respected thinkers in known space. Their civilization had existed for over 50,000 years, and they had produced more philosophers and scientists than most species produced individuals. A delegation of 12 elders approached the monolith together. Their bodies were with clicking mandibles and compound eyes that could see in spectrums beyond human perception. The lead elder spoke in a precise mechanical voice. "We propose that the answer is potential energy. It is greater than infinity because it represents all possibilities that have not yet become reality. It is more than all because it includes things that do not yet exist. The dead possess it eternally because their potential was never fulfilled. The living who have only potential without action will surely die." It was a clever answer. Many in the audience nodded with appreciation. The logic was sound and the reasoning was elegant. The monolith pulsed red, another failure. Next came They were not a single species, but rather a collective of billions of individual creatures linked by a quantum network that allowed them to think as one vast mind. When they spoke, it was with millions of voices in perfect harmony. "We have calculated every possible answer using processing power equivalent to a small star," they announced. "We have eliminated all logical impossibilities and narrowed the solution to a single concept. The answer is paradox itself. Only a paradox can be greater than infinity because paradoxes exist outside normal logical constraints. Only a paradox can be more than everything because paradoxes contain their own contradictions. The monolith considered this answer for longer than usual, found herself leaning forward in her seat. Perhaps the had finally cracked it. Red light pulsed across the black surface, failure once again. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. If the combined processing power of 17 billion minds could not solve the riddle, then what hope did anyone have? Met her sister at the docking bay that afternoon. Molly was 3 years younger than and had the same dark hair but a much warmer smile. She had never been interested in politics or diplomacy. She worked as a teacher back on Earth and was happiest when surrounded by children. Beside her stood Lucy, 8 years old with curious brown eyes and hair that refused to stay in its braids. She looked around the docking bay with an expression of mild interest, as if massive alien space stations were only slightly more exciting than a trip to the grocery store. Aunt Lucy ran forward and hugged her tightly. "Mom said there are aliens here, real aliens. Can I see one?" Laughed and hugged her niece back. "You'll see plenty of them, sweetie. This whole station is full of aliens." "Are they scary?" "Some of them look scary, but most of them are very nice. They're just different from us." Molly embraced her sister with a tired smile. "Thank you for having us. I know this is terrible timing with everything happening, but you promised Lucy months ago." "It's fine," said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. "I'm glad you're here. It's been too long." She showed them to the quarters that had been assigned to the human delegation. The rooms were small but comfortable and had a window that looked out at the stars. Lucy immediately pressed her face against the glass and stared at the ships moving back and forth. "What's that big meeting everyone keeps talking about?" Molly asked as she unpacked their bags. Explained about the monolith and the riddle. She told her sister about the thousands of years of failed attempts and the parade of brilliant minds that had tried and failed over the past week. Molly listened with polite interest, but it was clear that ancient alien puzzles were not really her concern. Lucy, however, turned away from the window. "What's the riddle?" Smiled at her niece. "It's very complicated, sweetie. Even the beings in the galaxy can't figure it out." "But what does it say?" Something in the girl's tone made pause. There was genuine curiosity there, not just childish questioning. She recited the riddle from memory. "I am greater than the infinite. I am more than all. The dead possess me eternally. The living who have me shall die." Lucy's face scrunched up in thought. "That's weird." "Yes, it is. Why can't anyone figure it out?" "Because the answer has to be something that fits all four parts of the riddle at once. Everything anyone has tried only fits 2 or 3 parts." Lucy nodded slowly and went back to looking out the window. Assumed the conversation was over and thought nothing more of it. The next day brought more failures. A species of energy beings proposed cosmic radiation as the answer. A race of aquatic creatures suggested the void between stars. A collective of artificial intelligences theorized about mathematical concepts that did not yet have names. "Red light, red light, red light." Chancellor addressed the assembly with growing frustration. "We have now received over 300 proposed solutions. Not one has been accepted. I begin to wonder if this riddle is truly meant to be solved, or if it is simply a cruel joke left by a dead civilization." Disagreed. She did not know why, but she felt certain that the riddle had a real answer. It was too elegant to be meaningless. The way it was constructed, the way each line built upon the last, suggested a genuine solution waiting to be discovered. That evening she sat in the observation lounge with Danny and stared out at the stars. The station was quieter now. Many delegations were losing hope and some had already departed. The great gathering was beginning to feel like a great waste of time. "Maybe we're all overthinking it," said. "Every answer so far has been some grand philosophical concept. Infinity, Paradox, potential. What if the answer is something simple? Danny shrugged. Simple things have been tried too. Someone proposed death as the answer. Someone else suggested sleep. Neither worked. Then the simple thing hasn't been found yet. She thought about Lucy and her strange curiosity about the riddle. Children saw the world differently than adults. They had not learned to make things complicated. They had not been trained to look for hidden meanings and complex solutions. What would a child say? The thought lingered in her mind as she went to bed that night. It followed her into her dreams and was still there when she woke up the next morning. She had no idea that the answer was already forming in a young girl's mind, just a few rooms away. Lucy was bored. She had been on the space station for 3 days now, and while the aliens were interesting at first, they had started to seem ordinary. They were just people really. Strange-looking people who spoke in clicks and hums and flashes of light, but still just people who walked around having boring conversations about boring things. Her mother and aunt spent most of their time in meetings. Lucy was left in the care of a nice woman named who worked in the human delegation support staff, was kind but not very imaginative. She kept suggesting that Lucy read books or watch educational videos about galactic history. Lucy did not want to read books about galactic history. She wanted to explore. On the 4th day, she slipped away while was distracted by a comm call. The station was huge and full of corridors that twisted and turned in confusing patterns. Lucy wandered through them without any real destination in mind. She just wanted to see something interesting. She found herself in a large room filled with scientists and diplomats from dozens of different species. They were all gathered around something at the center of the room. Lucy was too short to see what it was, so she pushed her way through the crowd until she reached the front. The monolith stood before her. It was the strangest thing she had ever seen. It was black, but not like normal black. It was black like the absence of everything. Looking at it made her eyes feel weird, like they were trying to focus on something that was not really there. A display screen nearby showed the riddle in human letters. Lucy read it slowly, moving her lips as she worked through each word. I am greater than the infinite. I am more than all. The dead possess me eternally. The living who have me shall die. A scientist noticed her standing there. It made a clicking sound that her translator turned into words. You should not be here, little human. This is not a place for children. Lucy ignored the alien. She was thinking about the riddle. Her grandfather had died last year. She remembered the funeral and the way everyone cried. She remembered asking her mother what happened to Grandpa and being told that he was gone. He did not have anything anymore. He did not feel anything anymore. He did not need anything anymore. He had nothing. The thought stuck in her mind like a splinter. Nothing. Her grandfather had nothing now. He would have nothing forever because he was dead, and dead people could not have things. She thought about the riddle again. The dead possess me eternally. What did dead people possess? Nothing. They possessed nothing because they were gone. The living who have me shall die. What happened to living people who had nothing? They died. If you had no food, you died. If you had no water, you died. If you had no air, you died. Nothing killed you. I am greater than the infinite. Lucy frowned at this part. How could nothing be greater than infinity? Infinity was the biggest thing there was. Her teacher had told her that infinity meant something that goes on forever and ever without stopping. But wait, infinity was something. It was a number that kept going. Nothing was not a number. Nothing was the absence of numbers. Nothing was the absence of everything. Her young mind worked through the problem slowly. If you asked someone to think of the biggest number, they would think of infinity. But infinity was still a number. It was still something. Nothing was not something. Nothing was the absence of all somethings. So in a weird way, nothing was bigger than infinity because infinity was limited by being a thing, and nothing was not limited by anything. I am more than all. All meant everything. Everything that existed. But nothing did not exist. Nothing was what was left when you took everything away. So nothing was more than all because all was limited to things that were real and nothing was not real. Lucy's eyes went wide. The answer was nothing. It had to be nothing. It was the only thing that fit all four parts of the riddle. "I know the answer," she said quietly. The scientist made another clicking sound. "Impossible. This riddle has defeated minds far greater than yours could ever be. Run along and play little creature." Lucy felt her face get hot. She did not like being talked down to. Adults always thought they knew everything just because they were bigger and older. But sometimes adults were wrong. Sometimes they made things too complicated. "The answer is nothing," she said louder. The scientists around her stopped talking. Several alien heads turned in her direction. A with purple tentacles made a bubbling noise that sounded like laughter. "Nothing has been proposed many times, child," they said. "It was rejected like all the others." "But did they explain it right?" Lucy asked. "Did they say why nothing fits all four parts?" The paused. Its tentacles stopped moving for a moment. "I do not recall the specific reasoning used." "Nothing is greater than infinity because infinity is something, and nothing is not something. Nothing is more than everything because everything only includes things that exist, and nothing does not exist. Dead people have nothing forever because they don't have anything anymore. And living people who have nothing will die because you can't live without things." The room had gone completely silent. Every alien was staring at the small human girl who had just explained a 3,000-year-old riddle in the simplest terms possible. A elder pushed through the crowd. It was one of the 12 who had failed days earlier. "This child speaks with unexpected clarity. Her reasoning is sound if unconventional." "It cannot be that simple," another scientist protested. "We have spent on this puzzle. A human child cannot have solved it in moments." "Perhaps that is exactly why she could solve it," the elder replied. "We have been looking for complex answers because we assumed the question was complex. But what if the builders wanted a simple answer? What if they designed the riddle to be solved by someone who had not yet learned to overthink?" Lucy did not understand everything they were saying, but she understood enough to know that they were taking her seriously now. That made her feel proud. Somewhere in the crowd, a commotion started, was pushing her way forward with panic on her face. She had been alerted that Lucy had gone missing and had been searching the station for the past hour. "Lucy, there you are. You can't just wander off like that." "Ain't I figured out the riddle?" Stopped, she looked at her niece, and then at the crowd of scientists who were all staring at the girl with expressions ranging from skepticism to amazement. "What?" "The answer is nothing. I can explain it if you want." Felt the world shift beneath her feet. She looked at the monolith standing silent and dark at the center of the room. She looked at the greatest minds in the galaxy who had failed for 3,000 years. And she looked at her 8-year-old niece who was smiling up at her with innocent confidence. "I think," said slowly, "we need to talk to the Chancellor." Chancellor did not believe it. He stood in his private chambers with his 4 arms crossed and his scales shifting through shades of dark blue that indicated deep skepticism. Before him stood with Lucy holding her hand and a growing crowd of scientists who had witnessed the child's explanation. "You wish me to present a human child before the monolith," said. His voice was flat and cold. "A child from a species that discovered space travel less than half a century ago. A child who has been alive for fewer years than I have been Chancellor." "With respect, sir, the reasoning is sound," said the elder who had supported Lucy earlier. "Her explanation fits every part of the riddle in a way that no previous answer has achieved. Nothing has been proposed before. It was rejected." The answer nothing was proposed, but never with this specific explanation. Previous attempts treated nothing as a philosophical concept or a mathematical zero. This child treats nothing as the literal absence of all things. It is a subtle but crucial difference. Scales flickered orange for a moment. He looked down at Lucy, who was staring back at him without any sign of fear. Human children were strange creatures. They did not seem to understand when they should be intimidated. "What makes you think you have succeeded where 17 billion connected minds failed?" asked her directly. Lucy shrugged. "I don't know if I'm right, but the riddle made sense to me when I thought about it. My grandpa died last year and I kept thinking about what he has now. Mom said he doesn't have anything. He has nothing. And then the riddle just kind of clicked." Was silent for a long moment. His scales shifted through several colors that did not recognize. Finally, he spoke. "I have led this council for 200 years. I have seen countless species rise and fall. I have witnessed wars and plagues and disasters that would break lesser civilizations, but I have never seen anything quite like this." He turned to face the window that looked out at the stars. "The builders of the monolith were ancient beyond our comprehension. They existed before our universe took its current form. Their technology and their wisdom surpassed anything we can imagine, and yet they left us a riddle that seems designed to be answered by a child." "Perhaps that was the point," said quietly. "Perhaps they wanted to remind us that wisdom is not the same as complexity, that the greatest truths are often the simplest ones." Turned back to face them. His scales had settled into a calm green. "Very well. We shall allow the child to present her answer before the monolith. If she fails, it will be just one more failure among thousands. But if she succeeds—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The amphitheater was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread through the station like fire through dry grass. A human child claimed to have solved the ancient riddle. Most beings came to watch the inevitable failure. Some came hopping for a miracle. All came out of curiosity. Lucy stood at the edge of the central platform looking up at the monolith. It seemed even larger now than it had before. Its black surface absorbed the light around it, creating a void that seemed to pull at her eyes. She could feel its presence like a weight pressing against her chest. Her mother stood in the front row of the audience. Molly's face was pale, and her hands were clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had tried to talk Lucy out of this. She had argued and pleaded and finally begged. But Lucy had refused to back down. "I know I'm right, Mom," she had said. "I can feel it." Stood beside her sister, offering what comfort she could. Danny was nearby with his tablet ready to record everything that happened. The entire human delegation was present. For better or worse, this moment would define humanity's place in the galactic community for generations to come. Chancellor raised one of his 4 hands, and the amphitheater fell silent. "We are gathered to witness an unprecedented event. A human child of 8 years will present her solution to the riddle of, may wisdom guide her words." He turned to Lucy and nodded. "You may approach the monolith." Lucy walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The floor seemed to stretch beneath her, and the monolith seemed to grow taller with every step. But she did not stop. She kept walking until she stood directly before the ancient artifact. Up close, the monolith was terrifying. It radiated a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Looking at it was like looking at death itself. Lucy understood now why so many brilliant minds had failed. Standing here before this thing, it was almost impossible to think clearly. But she was a child, and children are remarkably good at pushing through fear when they believe in something. "Go ahead, child," a technician said. "Speak your answer clearly. The monolith will respond." Lucy took a deep breath. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the empty space he had left behind. She thought about all the nothing that filled the universe between the stars. "The answer is nothing," she said. Her voice was small, but it carried through the silent amphitheater. "Nothing is greater than infinity because infinity is still something. Nothing is more than everything because everything is limited to things that exist, and nothing does not exist. The dead possess nothing forever because they have stopped possessing anything at all. and the living who have nothing will die because you cannot live without something." The words hung in the air. The monolith stood dark and silent. Every being in the amphitheater held their breath. 1 second passed, 2 seconds, 3. Lucy felt tears forming in her eyes. She had been so sure, so completely certain. But the monolith was not responding. It was going to pulse red like all the others, and she would have failed in front of the entire galaxy. Then the monolith began to glow. Light spread across its surface like water flowing over stone. Patterns emerged from the blackness. Symbols and shapes and what looked like star maps appeared in brilliant gold against the dark background. A deep harmonic tone filled the chamber. It was a sound that seemed to resonate in the bones of every living creature present. And then a voice spoke. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It was ancient beyond measure and filled with something that might have been joy. At last, after so long, a mind uncluttered by the weight of accumulated knowledge has perceived what wisdom obscured. The answer is nothing. The path to the first library is now open. The voice continued as more symbols and coordinates appeared on the monolith's surface. Remember this lesson. The greatest truths are often the simplest. Those who know too much frequently forget what they once understood. This child has reminded you of what your ancestors knew before they learned to complicate everything. Lucy stood frozen in place. She was crying now, but they were tears of relief and wonder. She had been right. She had actually been right. Behind her, the amphitheater erupted into chaos. Beings shouted and clicked and flashed and hummed. Some were celebrating. Others were arguing. Many were simply staring at the small human girl who had just changed the course of galactic history. Molly broke through the crowd and swept Lucy up in her arms. She was crying too. They held each other while the galaxy went mad around them. Watched with tears streaming down her face. Her little niece had just accomplished something that the greatest civilizations in existence had failed to achieve for 3,000 years. And she had done it not despite being a child, but because she was a child. The riddle had never needed complexity. It had only ever needed simplicity. The galaxy had changed overnight. The coordinates revealed by the monolith pointed to a system deep in the galactic core, where a structure of impossible size waited in a pocket of folded spacetime. The first library, a repository of knowledge from a civilization that had existed before the current universe formed. Technology and science and history beyond anything the modern galaxy had ever imagined. Ships from every spacefaring civilization were already racing toward those coordinates. It would take months for most of them to arrive and years more to begin cataloging what they found there. But the discovery itself was enough to reshape politics and alliances across known space. And at the center of it all was an 8-year-old girl who did not really understand what she had done. Lucy sat in the observation lounge with a bowl of ice cream. It was chocolate chip, her favorite. Her mother sat beside her looking exhausted but happy. And Danny were there too, along with several members of the human delegation who had become instant celebrities simply by being in the right place at the right time. "I still don't get why everyone is making such a big deal," Lucy said between bites of ice cream. "It was just a riddle." Laughed. It was a sound mixed with exhaustion and wonder and something that might have been tears. "That's exactly the point, Lucy. It was just a riddle. But for 3,000 years, everyone treated it like something more. They thought the answer had to be as complicated as the question seemed. They forgot that sometimes the simplest answer is the right one." "But nothing is obvious," Lucy protested. "Once you think about it, I mean. It's obvious to you, but you haven't spent thousands of years building up assumptions about how things should work. You looked at the riddle with fresh eyes and saw what everyone else had learned to overlook." Chancellor entered the lounge with a delegation of council members behind him. His scales were a warm golden color that had never seen before. It took her a moment to realize that the ancient alien was happy. "Young Lucy of Earth," said formally, The Galactic Council wishes to extend its deepest gratitude. Your insight has ended a mystery that plagued our civilizations for 3. You have earned a place in the histories of 100 worlds. Lucy looked up at the towering alien with chocolate smeared on her chin. Thank you. Can I have more ice cream? Paused. His scales flickered through several colors as he processed the request. He had dealt with demands from emperors and threats from warlords and negotiations with beings of godlike power. He had never been asked for ice cream before. You may have all the ice cream you desire, he said finally. I shall ensure that the finest frozen desserts in the galaxy are made available to you. Cool. The delegation departed after exchanging formal pleasantries with and the other humans. Once they were gone, Molly put her arm around Lucy and pulled her close. You know, when we get home, everything is going to be different, she said. People are going to want to talk to you. Scientists and reporters and government officials. Everyone is going to want to know about the girl who solved the ancient riddle. Lucy made a face. That sounds boring. It probably will be sometimes, but you did something incredible. You should be proud of yourself. I am proud. I just don't see why everyone else is so surprised. The answer was right there the whole time. Shook her head with a smile. That's what makes it so remarkable, Lucy. The answer was right there, but no one could see it. Sometimes it takes someone who hasn't learned all the rules to realize that the rules don't always apply. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and ceremonies and interviews. Lucy handled it all with the patient tolerance of a child who would rather be doing anything else. She answered the same questions over and over and smiled for pictures with beings she could not pronounce the names of, and sat through speeches that made her want to fall asleep. Through it all, she never lost her sense of perspective. She had solved a riddle. It was nice that everyone was happy about it, but she had not done anything special really. She had just looked at a puzzle and found the piece that fit. The human delegation returned to Earth 2 weeks later. They were greeted as heroes. Humanity had gone from being the youngest and least respected species in the galactic community to being the civilization that solved the impossible puzzle. Diplomatic offers and trade agreements flooded in from worlds that had never shown interest in humans before. Lucy went back to school. Her classmates treated her differently now. Some were impressed and some were jealous, and some were just confused about why everyone was making such a fuss. Lucy ignored all of it and focused on her homework and her friends, and the normal things that an 8-year-old cared about. Years later, historians would argue about what Lucy's achievement meant for humanity's place in the galaxy. Some said it proved that human minds were uniquely suited for lateral thinking. Others said it was just luck that a child happened to stumble on the right answer. A few suggested that the ancient builders had somehow intended for a human to solve their riddle all along. Lucy never cared about any of that. When asked about the riddle in interviews as she grew older, she always gave the same answer. I didn't do anything complicated. I just thought about what the words meant. Nothing is greater than everything because everything is limited and nothing is not. That's not clever. That's just obvious if you don't overthink it. The first library eventually gave up its secrets. The knowledge contained within it revolutionized science and medicine and philosophy across the galaxy. Wars were prevented, and diseases were cured, and technologies that had seemed like magic became commonplace. The ancient builders had left behind gifts beyond measure, and they had locked those gifts behind a riddle that only simplicity could solve. Somewhere in the vast archives of the library, the explorers found a message left by the builders. It was carved into a wall of crystal in mathematical symbols that any intelligent species could understand. When translated, it read, "We made the riddle easy on purpose. We wanted to see how long it would take for someone to remember that not everything needs to be complicated. The answer was always nothing. It was always obvious. We hoped it would not take 3,000 years. We were apparently too optimistic about the wisdom of younger civilizations. Some said this was a joke. Others believed it was a profound commentary on the nature of intelligence and the trap of accumulated knowledge. Lucy, when she heard about it many years later, just laughed. "They sound like they had a good sense of humor," she said. "I think I would have liked them." And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. The ancient builders had been wise beyond measure, but they had also understood something that many wise beings forget. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones that make you smile. Sometimes the answer really is just nothing.